Good morning. You've tuned into the Indiana State Police Roadshow, brought to you by the Indiana State Police Alliance. Cops for Kids, a subsidiary of the Indiana State Police Alliance. I'm your host, Sergeant Rich Myers, with the Indiana State Police Public Information Office. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Tom Trial, our man behind the scenes, putting us on YouTube each and every week. Make sure that you go to our YouTube site and look at some of Tom's workings that he has on there. We've got some old videos, some new videos, everything that's going on around the state with the Indiana State Police. So it's very, very interesting. ISP YouTube site. Click on it and you'll have a grand experience with that. Thank you, Tom. Very good, Tom. Appreciate that. Eric Strevel, thank you for being here with us today.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Sergeant Eric Strevel with the Indiana State Police Aviation Section. He's been on here before, and we've had him talking about the Indiana State Police Aviation. And I think you were you in aviation when you and Anthony did this many moons ago?
Yes.
Were you in aviation then? Was that on we didn't put that on YouTube at that time, though.
No, it was just a radio program.
Yeah. So you could I was with Anthony Emery too. That's been a couple decades ago.
It was a long time.
Well, tell us a little bit about Eric Strevel, how he got to the Indiana State Police, and ultimately how you got to the aviation section.
Well, I'm a pilot that became a policeman. I think that's what I set out to do in life, be a pilot. I kind of found my way into police work through, I learned to fly at Vincennes University, got an associate's degree down there.
Were you going to school down there then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And as an aviation.
Okay.
I was in an aviation program down there.
Nothing about police. You just wanted to fly.
Nothing at all. Through the course of working, mowing grass and flying at the airport in my hometown on weekends, I met a fellow that was a Indiana University policeman.
Okay.
And I knew as I moved forward, I was going to get a bachelor's degree in something other than aviation. It was going to be, and so I ended up at IUPUI with a history degree. But I worked for the university police.
Okay. Where was that at? Which campus?
Right over here.
Okay, right here downtown.
West of us here. So I worked there, and as I approached graduation, state police were hiring. They had aircraft. It was sort of a slow time in aviation, so I put in, and here I am.
Well, that's
22 years later.
Now, you didn't go right to that, though.
No, I started out 8 years with you. I was a road troop out there back in our day. I had to promote into that position, but I continued to fly as a contractor on the side while I was working as a policeman for the state police, and eventually was able to compete to get into the section. And with I was able to secure a position after 8 years.
So, what was your first aircraft that you ever set foot in and took off?
On the department or in?
Period.
It was a Tomahawk, a Piper Tomahawk.
And so what was the first one on the department?
Would have been a Cessna 172, because that's where everybody starts out in the small fixed-wing aircraft.
Okay.
They put you out kind of your trial period to see your probationary period.
See, they don't want you to crash anything big. It's kind of like our cars. They'll give you something.
Yeah, they don't give you a new one. They give you something that's take a little wear.
Yeah, and that's been tested true. That's pretty tested true airplane, right?
Oh yeah, it's ubiquitous. They're everywhere.
Yeah,
they've been around for many years and still making them today.
So when you started with the department, were you a fixed wing and rotary wing certified?
When I started with the department, my entire background was fixed wing aircraft. I was doing some contract corporate work on the side, flying for several companies around Indiana and working on my degree and working for the IU Police Department. I did not actually start flying helicopters until 2003. I was still a road troop with you out at Putnamville District.
Okay.
And I went and obtained those certifications, and not long after that, I was able to apply them on the department.
So is there one that you like better than the other? Are they completely different that you don't even, compare them?
I'm asked that question a lot, and it's really hard for me to answer it easily. The answer is no. I mean, I like doing both. If you took one away from me, I would miss it.
Okay.
So I'm going to be at my happiest and my most fulfilled in a job where I can do both fixed wing and rotary aviation.
And there's probably two different sets of jobs for them in there. I mean,
two different industries. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's the helicopter industry is much smaller than the fixed wing aviation side of it, because you've got the airlines and whatnot, corporate, the whole gamut. Versus on helicopters, it's much narrower and a much smaller field. But nonetheless, it's a lucrative field. It's a very booming field at this point in time those people probably notice from that aspect of it, a whole lot of medical helicopters have appeared in the last 15 or 20 years.
Right.
That's the biggest face on it that you'll see around Indiana. You get on the coasts and in the energy industry, sector out along the coasts, you'll see a lot more helicopter aviation, or in the tour areas. Anybody that's been to Vegas knows you can't, or Hawaii knows you can't look up. The sky's full of helicopters.
Really? Just tours and things?
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I never thought about that. Even probably Grand Canyon and things like that. Hawaii, you got a lot of tours and that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure the military.
I mean, the military is not, that's a whole nother segment.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
well, let's talk a little bit about ISP aviation section. So, what started? Do you have any background on when it was started and why it was started or anything?
We Indiana State Police Aviation began in 1947. They purchased a single-engine airplane for transports, searches, a little bit of everything. When they started doing it, it was sort of one airplane that did everything. It evolved after that into by the time they got into the 1950s, they purchased their first helicopters which is to this day, it's the same kind of stuff basic stuff we use them for now, a little bit more limited because they didn't have some of the technology that we have, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
And they operated those aircraft into the 60s. There was a brief time in the mid-60s, I believe, when the state got out of the aviation business altogether from a law enforcement standpoint. I can't speak to any other areas. They found out pretty quick that was not working well at all because there was no one to provide that service.
Right.
So in 1969, I believe it was, they bought, it was federally funded through a grant, they bought 5 helicopters and got back into it at that point with 5 helicopters positioned around the state ultimately, and the fixed-wing aircraft came along with it as well. They bought, I think it was 2 Cessnas back then to get back into the fixed-wing side of it. And then it went forward from there into the 80s. It was a great time for us. Into the 90s, many aircraft were acquired through various sources. Not very many new ones after that. The last new aircraft the state bought prior to recent times was 1987, I believe. We approached into the 90s. As they went forward, we acquired our first thermal imager, which was sort of the great leap forward. This was before my time in technology, whereas before, as you would expect, you fly over something, it's all visual eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
What you see is what you get.
Right.
If some people are familiar with the thermal imaging that you'll see on television and whatnot, we actually, as a department, acquired one, our very first one that we placed on a helicopter in 1994. Now,
how does that work? What does actually the thermal imager do?
It basically sees on a different wavelength of the light spectrum, as it's been described to me. It picks up heat. You see heat is what you see, as opposed to the actual colors and whatnot. It's monochrome. It's black and white.
That's what you see on some of the police chases.
It depends on how you've got it set up, or configured. Heat either shows up, which most people see it on television, as white, glows really white, or alternately you can flip it and the heat will show up as black. Depends on how you've got it set up. And we use those for any number of things, searches. We've used them for hot spots on large fires around the state, so the fire departments could determine where to go about applying what they do to secure that fire.
Missing people?
Yeah. We'll use it on the criminal side to certain extents for marijuana indoor grows, things like that.
Now, can that be used during the day or night?
Oh, yeah, it can. Now, the older ones were a lot more sensitive. The term was thermal loading, I believe, that they use. Basically, sunlight will heat stuff up. The newer ones, with the technology they've pretty much gotten around that.
Okay.
And the quality of the picture as such, where it used to be a little grainy, it's almost like looking at a black and white television. It's that clear. So,
well, again, you're listening to the Indiana State Police Roadshow, brought to you by the Indiana State Police Alliance and Cops for Kids, a subsidiary of the Indiana State Police Alliance. I've got Sergeant Eric Strevel from the aviation section here with us today, and we're talking about some new aviation technology and some new equipment that they have there at the Indiana State Police Aviation Section. So the thermal imager was kind of a step forward. And did anything else there come along then? We
operated those two particular pieces of equipment into the 2000s, 2006, 2007. As with anything like that, if it's a complex piece of equipment, it very rapidly becomes outdated,
right,
and increasingly harder to maintain. So we were at a point where we had to upgrade those, and our first step in that direction was we took one of our older one of our helicopters that we'd had for a while and refurbished it. It had a thermal imager on it. We sent that aircraft in for a pretty extensive overhaul of its sensor packages and components and the things that it was capable of from a police mission standpoint.
Good.
So basically it came back out of that with a brand new thermal imager, which is a state-of-the-art piece of equipment. In addition to that, we had a mapping system, which in the past, we relied pretty much on our knowledge of the state and a road map to find our way around to get where we needed to go. The mapping system that we have in the aircraft now, when you sit down, you power everything up, you slide a keyboard out. The TFO does. The pilot doesn't. I watch him do this. I fly. But the TFO will type in the address a lat long anywhere in the state. It can actually go anywhere in the country, this system will. But anywhere in the state, you either put a lat long, an address, an intersection, anything, and it'll pop right up. And the camera will point at that. Of course, you're many miles away. And when you fly to it, as you get over the top of it, it will just lock onto it and start to track it. It's a very neat system with the thermal imager, which with the thermal imager we're referring to, it has a day camera, a normal television type camera in it for a day use. We can also use the thermal imaging package on it if we need to, but it also, in conjunction with that, there's when people also think of police aviation, they think of the traditional spotlight shining down.
Right.
Well, some of the issues we have with the spotlight was using it in conjunction with the thermal imager have been solved because it is slaved to the thermal imager. Whatever the thermal imager is looking at, or the day camera, if we turn on the spotlight, obviously, we wouldn't use the spotlight in the daytime, but at night it will track right there with what you're looking at, and all the systems are looking in the same area and they're staying on target, which greatly reduces the workload of the operator. So he can focus more at the task of hand, which is looking at his screen and trying to locate whatever it is we're looking for.
Wow. And then we just took we got about 2 minutes here, and we just took delivery of a new one.
Yes. After the one was refurbished, we just took delivery of a brand new Bell 407 GXP. It has the identical sensor package that I just talked about. It's just on a newer airframe, which is far more capable than the older airframe that we have. Basically, it'll get there faster, stay longer, and take a lot more with it. But the actual sensor package is almost identical to the one that's on the aircraft that we had refurbished.
So you have some very up-to-date equipment in both helicopters.
Yeah, there is nothing better out there.
So what's the difference between your two helicopters? You say is it like you say, stay longer? The passengers, do they both carry the same passengers, or
they both have the same passenger configuration? The older aircraft is a Bell 206 L3.
Okay.
Manufactured in the late 80s. The aircraft that we just took delivery of is a 407. These are just numbers to people.
Right.
GXP. It's basically they took all the shortcomings of the Long Ranger Bell helicopter did and said, what were the customer complaints, and now we'll make it do this. So. Okay. It's the product improved version of it. The L is a very capable aircraft, but it did have its limitations as they got it into the field. The L407 addresses those with speed, endurance, and payload capacity.
So in our show here, because we got about a minute left, what is our current configuration? What do we have out there in the field?
Currently, we have right now we have one location. We've brought all our assets to one location in Indianapolis to better serve the whole state. With the limited resources we have now, as we've acquired new aircraft, we do have fewer. We do have a Cessna up in the Valparaiso area. We have 3 helicopters in the Indianapolis area and 1 Cessna aircraft in the Indianapolis area.
It sounds like, though, the superintendent is pushing forward to make the aviation section again very, very profitable.
Yes, we started a process of scaling down, getting rid of our older aircraft. Now we're in the process of replacing them with a newer, albeit smaller, but far more capable fleet.
Great. Roadshow is out.